Thank you.
Thank you.
Don.
So we'll just do this until we stop doing this, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amy Montemarano, and I am a Davis Phinney Ambassador and also a lawyer in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I have the honor and the privilege of interviewing today the Honorable Ross Andrews, who is a judge on the Syracuse City Court bench. And Judge Andrews and I decided beforehand that I could call him Ross,
Please. Yes.
which I will do, but it feels weird. And we are talking to Ross today about working with Parkinson's and also some legal issues about working with Parkinson's. And I am going to ask Ross some questions about his own story and also about some advice that he might give to others about working with Parkinson's. So I'm just going to start with a question to you, Ross, about your diagnosis. If you can just tell us a little bit about your story, when you were
Sure.
diagnosed, how it came about, and how long ago that was.
Sure. Well, I had noticed a little bit of a tremor in my right hand, and I'm left-handed, but in my right hand for a little while before I went and talked to my doctor about it, which was 2007. And I was 44 years old. I was entering the prime of my legal career. It's a job that has a long learning curve to do it right, and
Yeah.
I had lots of wonderful experiences already, but really felt like I was in my stride and everything was going pretty well. So it hit me pretty well. I was actually worried initially about it being MS because I have a grandmother who died of MS. And I asked my own doctor, who sent me to a specialist, of course, or to a neurologist, but what he thought it might be. Might it be MS? And he said, no, Parkinson's. And that was quite a surprise to me. I don't come from a family with Parkinson's disease. In fact, my 23andMe profile says that I have a lower than average chance of getting Parkinson's disease. Yay. Didn't work out that way, but
Same here. Yeah.
oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's pretty much where I was. And I had children who were 16 and 13 when I was diagnosed. And I was initially diagnosed dopamine agonist, which I know that was, I think, the standard of care then. It may still be now, I'm not sure, but it really adversely affected me, as it turned out. It took a while to figure it out because I became somewhat depressed and anxious, and I'm really not a depressed and anxious person, but and very fatigued. But I thought about it, and I thought, well, this is not unnatural. I've just been diagnosed with a progressive neurological disease, so I probably should be depressed and anxious. But actually, as a result of skipping a dose once, I just in the afternoon felt so much less fatigued than I had in the past. And I actually did what nobody should do ever, and stopped taking them rather precipitously. And I felt a lot better. And I still had the tremor in my hand, which was not really affected by the medicine, but I felt like I was stepping out from under a cloud. And it was kind of the first time that my experience went on an upward angle, of which I've had many. I don't know if this is common either, but my experience has been a little more of a roller coaster up and down than a descent. And when you hear about Parkinson's, certainly from what I knew, I thought it was going to be a clear descent, but it's turned out not to be that way at all.
I guess we should stop right here and just make a disclaimer that we're not medical professionals.
Oh, yes.
So don't take any of our advice about what to do about pharmaceuticals.
You cut that out entirely if you want to.
No, it's fine.
But that was my experience. I read afterwards that it could have provoked a very serious event.
Yeah.
And that it's not the way to go about it. You know, if I had to do it again today, I would do it gradually, but
So, okay,
uh,
so,
in the moment, I was not thinking that clearly, just feeling better, so I stopped.
yeah. So you were diagnosed, you were 44, you were in the middle of a really promising and highly challenging and active law practice, and you had two middle school aged kids or teenagers at home. Um, and you decided to continue working full time. And not only that, but you decided to run for judge, which in New York is a process by which you have to get elected, right? So you have to campaign.
That's right, yes.
And I
Um,
assume that campaigning involves a lot of energy.
it does. I knocked on thousands of doors and spoke to many people, went to many neighborhood events and parades, and so it was quite a process. But I had done a fair amount of political work in my life, so working for other candidates, and so I had a pretty good idea of what I was getting into. But that was years after my diagnosis, also. So I had some time to get used to it. My initial reaction was actually to pull back from some of those outside political activities and to try to focus my life on work a little more because I really I didn't feel like I was done working, and I had a tremor that grew increasingly bad in my right hand. So I spent lots of time sitting on that hand to just keep it under control and to keep from being a distraction. But I didn't hide it. If people asked about it, then I told them what I had. And if they didn't, then they didn't. And, it's funny how people who have Parkinson's or have people with Parkinson's in their lives, they know, they just, the perceptive ones anyway, they just say, how long have you had Parkinson's? It's
Yeah.
kind of, it's,
So how did your law partners take it?
well, in fact, I was told initially by one of the first doctors that I saw that I should seriously take a step back and consider how to approach them and whether to approach them about it. I'm sure that was born of experience by the doctor of someone who had a bad experience. But, what he didn't understand was my partner, Mimi Satter, was also, probably my best friend. And just someone who I trusted implicitly and had absolute faith in. And so after my sister, who's a physician, she was the second person I told. In fact, I called my sister walking back to the office, walked in to Mimi's office and told her, and she took it very well. And to this day, even though we don't work together, is very supportive. And she eventually, when I pulled out of the funk from the dopamine agonists, got me on a bicycle and started me into that. I'm still on a stationary bike quite regularly to this day. So I do wonder if part of my slower descent, part of my occasional upward trends, have had something to do with the fact that she got me exercising right away, which we know is exercise is medicine, as you'll see frequently on Parkinson's website. And it really is true. It's the best medicine.
So you continued to be a labor and employment lawyer for
I
how many
did.
years before you decided to run for judge?
I would say 7 or 8.
7 or 8 years. And then
Probably
you
7 years
decided,
until I ran. Yeah.
hey, let me undertake this enormously exhausting experience of, of running for elected office. 8 years into my Parkinson's diagnosis, I'm really intrigued and curious about that decision because so many people, even if they do continue working 8 years or 10 years, um, they contract for obvious reasons.
Sure.
And you expanded. And I really want to know what was that mindset for you? What made you decide to do that?
Well, I had worked successfully for some years, although again, there were ups and downs. And during that period of time, among other things, I had my first DBS surgery in 2012, which really, it was like a miracle. It was, again, one of the upward ascents. I had some minor issues with my legs and my feet, but my major issue was the tremor in my right hand at that point in time, and it was gone. I mean, after the second or third programming episode, it was like unbelievable. I was cured. I felt like, and they told me it wouldn't last forever. That even tremor dominant people will develop other symptoms, and that eventually my left hand would go too. And I'd have to do the same thing, but I just felt so positive about everything that I just didn't feel limited at that point. So I did go ahead and run, and again I walked a lot, and that was actually great exercise. I was kept off the bike some, but it was good exercise. And I did have a little bit of a problem with stairs, and that was a little bit of an issue. But if there was a good railing, I just pulled myself right up, and otherwise I was just very careful and took my time.
So
But
now
it
you've
was it was wonderful getting out and talking to people, some of whom, again, on the campaign trail, would recognize the slightly developing tremor in my left hand,
yeah.
and comment on it, but nobody negatively. And everybody who I talked to about it, there's not a lot of full-blown discussions about it, but there were a couple, and they were all very supportive. And actually, when I made the decision to run, it was suggested to me by a dear friend of mine named Pam Hunter, well, actually, we were talking about it, and she noted that there was a seat opening up, a new seat created. And, when I raised the possibility of running for it, she was very supportive. And so it's another case of having a good, strong, supportive friend who encouraged me to do it.
And then you won.
And then I won, lo and behold. In
And now you've been on the
Syracuse,
bench.
for sake of full disclosure, the election itself was not much of a contest because I had no opponent, but I did have a very well-known and competent opponent in the primary. That was really where the election was.
Yeah. It's
So,
hard. In this day and age,
yeah,
any election, any campaign is very
yes,
difficult and taxing.
it was
And now you've
very
been on the bench
intense.
for 7 years, is that right?
Uh, 6+, yeah.
Okay. And, part of your job a large part of your job has to do with speaking all day.
It does. And after my second DBS surgery, which actually happened in my first year as a judge, I did start I had some issues with softening of the voice already, even before the surgery. But afterwards, I started to experience some tightness in my throat, which I have a little bit of right now.
Mhm.
And some tightness up here, which interfered both with volume and diction. And it was not an easy thing to deal with. That was probably the toughest thing that I've faced so far in my career because, a boxer leads with his fists. I also highly recommend rock steady boxing, which is a great form of exercise, which
Yeah,
I've done. But a boxer leads with his fists, a judge leads with his voice, and there's no way
yeah,
around that, really.
yeah,
And there are some things that, people have to hear from the judge. And so at one point it was concerning enough that I went and spoke to my supervising judge and to my administrative judge. And they were both very supportive, said they had not heard any complaints at all, had only heard good things. So go keep up the good work. So although it did not completely alleviate my concern, it did to a large extent and stop me thinking about whether I would use my disability insurance, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
mhm,
But it was all it was somewhat traumatic, and even now it's of course frustrating. It's enormously humbling, Oh, it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm sure you've been before many judges. Some probably could have used some humbling. And it wasn't the worst thing in the world to have to go through. And, people recognize it in court too. And people wish me the best with my condition. And people, so even defendants, so it's been an experience.
What was it like to feel the shift in your identity?
Created by my voice.
Created by your diagnosis.
Oh, my diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I think that's a big issue for many people. They are active professionals, often at the top of their game,
yes.
like you were, and then all of a sudden they become the weak one in the crowd, and they're not, they don't. It's really hard. It's really hard to change your role that way so suddenly.
And it was really hard, although, in retrospect, my experience with the medication may have ended up empowering me in an odd way when it finished, because when I felt like I had my life back, when the depression went away, when the anxiety went away, and when the fatigue went away, it was really like a new morning for me, and that helped me to see things positively. And my partner Mimi Satter had a saying when she told me that I was going to go out and ride a bike with her, that you shouldn't rehearse misery. If at a given point in time you're not feeling that bad, or you're feeling able to do something, then do it. Don't be miserable. Don't worry about the future, because it may not be it may not be as bad as you think it's going to be, but B, if you worry about it first, then you have to live it twice. So
So
well,
don't
I do
rehearse
that.
misery. I love that phrase.
Don't rehearse misery. Mimi
That's gonna be something I put up on my little wall here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you manage your energy during the day? You have a really challenging job.
If you can see over my shoulder back here a couch, where I try to get at least a 15 or 20-minute nap every day as my primary mechanism. It is
Yeah.
a very intense job being a city court judge.
Yeah.
COVID's changed everything, of course, and we're doing a lot remotely, but typically it's a couple to 3 or so hours on the bench in the morning, and then a similar period in the afternoon. And it's one case after another, after another, after another. It's been likened to drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
Is the best description I've ever heard of it. And so it is a very intense job, and to some extent, the intensity of it keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
But I do find I warn my staff, if I haven't been able to get my nap in, then I'm going to be grumpy in the afternoon. So watch
Yeah.
out.
I have the same thing. I got a couch. I take 2 naps a day, and that helps a lot
2 a
in my
day. That's
in
a
my
good
office.
thought.
Yeah, like a toddler. Can we shift over now to some advice that you might want to give to others who are thinking about and worried about their continued ability to work after a diagnosis?
Sure, sure.
Because you were a labor and employment lawyer, so I know that you have firsthand experience along with just, the kind of work and legal training that you've mastered. So, what advice would you give to somebody who's diagnosed and wants to continue to work?
Yeah, here's the
General question,
thing.
I know.
Here's the thing. Just like everyone's Parkinson's is different. What's the saying? If you've seen one person with Parkinson's, you've seen one
Seen
person
one.
with Parkinson's.
Yeah,
That's going to be true of the legal situations too, both because the illness presents different ways, it has different effects on different people, and because different people's jobs have different requirements. But if you're determined to keep working, or if you're determined, for that matter, to file for disability, or if you're not sure what you need to do, so really it's a full universe of situations. My advice is to invest a little money in speaking to a knowledgeable disability rights attorney. And
Disability rights attorney. Can you sort of like explain a little bit more what that means?
sure, I may be the only one who's ever applied that term, but that's how I increasingly came to think of myself as a labor, employment, disability rights person. I did do some Social Security disability and some long-term disability work before my diagnosis, but afterwards, I seem to have developed an interest in doing more of it, and it became a bigger part of my practice. And as it becomes a bigger part of your practice, you have some success, it grows a little bit, but preferably it means someone who has both experience with staying on the job type disability rights, Americans with Disability Act type knowledge, and disability seeking knowledge, like Social Security disability, and hopefully you can find in one person also the long-term disability claims if you have insurance. But so again, for everyone's situation is going to be a little different, but I mean someone who really focuses in the area of helping you determine when you should be working, when you should be requesting accommodations, when you should be leaving work, and what the different approaches are to that, because it can be a very thin line. For example, for a disability claim, either Social Security disability or disability insurance, you need to have evidence in the record. It helps a lot, let's say, to have a development of evidence in the medical record by your doctor of limitations that you experience and different problems that you have, so that when you get there, you're not, doctors, I don't think it's in their collective DNA to say you're doing poorly. They're encouraging, they went into the profession to help people. They tend to want to be a little more bright in their medical records. I've reviewed thousands of pages of medical records, and sometimes you get it where someone says they're doing great, they're doing great, they're doing great, they're doing great, then they file for disability, oh, they're terrible. And that obviously doesn't look as good as if you build up a little bit of a history showing, a development of limitations. It's a little more convincing to an administrative law judge or whoever's making a determination of disability. Now, on the other hand, if you want to stay working, then you don't want to provide too much evidence for, you never want to end up in litigation. Talking to a good lawyer is always about avoiding being in litigation by taking wise steps. But if you do end up in litigation, you have a history of they're doing terrible, they have all these limitations, you built a record for your disability, that can also actually weigh against you in an effort to stay on the job. Now, of course, medical records are confidential and you have to be involved in actual litigation generally if your employer to have a right to them. So, it's not like it's an open book unless you open it, but it is something to be concerned about. And again, something that really requires the guidance of a lawyer. In a good place, there's Social Security lawyer. There's an organization called NOSCR, the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, I believe. And there's also the employment lawyers, the National Employment Lawyers Association, NELA, NELA. And, optimally you pick someone who's a member of both those groups.
So, I'm just pretend I'm someone who's was diagnosed a couple of years ago, and now I'm thinking about hiring a lawyer to advise me about what to do next. But I've never worked with lawyers before, definitely not disability lawyers. And I'm not really in a big city. I'm kind of in a small town where there's not a lot of legal presence. What would you recommend that I do to try to find a lawyer?
Well, the first thing I'd say is one thing the pandemic's taught us is we don't have to be in the same place as our advisors, colleagues, or coworkers even. So
You have to be in the same state though, right?
you would generally have to be in the same state for Social Security law. Not necessarily, and they're actually national Social Security firms. And there are slight differences based on decisions that are made in courts at the appellate level that might be a little different, but generally it's going to be pretty much the same. For disability law, for disability insurance, again, it varies on whether it's employer provided or not. If you have employer provided insurance, then a claim is going to be judged under a law called ERISA, the Employment Retirement Income Security Act, which
Super simple.
super simple. ERISA, ERSA is how we refer to it, even the lawyers. And ERISA has a developed body of case law that, again, will vary a little bit by jurisdiction, but it's not hard to figure out what those variances are. So, that's my first piece of advice is don't be shy to go to the bigger town down the road. Again, it is helpful to be in the same state, but it's not an absolute must. If you just don't have any knowledgeable legal people, then there's probably someone who does it for your state anyway, in a neighboring state in the city or something, who's accustomed to people showing up and saying, well, I'm from next door, but I couldn't find anyone there. So they probably will have heard that if they really focus on that as a practice. But, again, make use of the technology and do your best to find someone who's experienced, because, general practitioners vary, of course. There's some who are very talented, can pick up anything in a hurry, but there's never going to be the same type of knowledge and experience, even as an out-of-state disability rights lawyer.
So there's not the equivalent of a Yelp page for lawyers so that you can see other people's reviews. I mean, there are some, but they're not as helpful and useful as trying to find a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
How can people who are shopping around for a lawyer know that who they're hiring is somebody who's good, who's experienced, who's honest, and who's going to take care of their needs? How do you figure that out?
Well, there is something called Martindale-Hubbell, which I'm sure you're familiar with,
Mhm.
which rates lawyers according to other lawyers' opinions about them. And that can vary, but to even be rated, I believe there has to be a finding that you're at least honest
Competent,
and something, competent and honest,
minimal
yeah,
competence.
and integrity, yes,
Yeah.
which is all you can expect from our profession anyway, right?
No, no, no,
Just a
you didn't.
joke,
No,
just a
I
joke.
expect way more than minimal competence.
No, actually, the people who appear before me, I never failed to be amazed with the level of competence and integrity. So there are I think there are a lot more good lawyers out there, well-meaning lawyers, honest lawyers,
Yeah,
than there are anything else. And
yeah,
our profession takes a rap because we get involved in situations that are not happy moments in many people's lives,
yeah.
and often involve conflict. And so I understand the negative feelings that get thrown at our profession, but I really don't think they're generally accurate.
It's great to hear from a sitting judge. And, what I hear you talking about is a lot of optimism in your life. Would you say that that's accurate?
It's true, and I think that probably comes from my parents, and they say it makes a difference medically. Your attitude is one of the best predictors of how any malady will go.
Yeah,
How any sickness will develop and progress and what it'll do to you, and that a positive perspective is actually clinically helpful.
yeah.
I think the studies show. So yeah,
So, and along with that optimism, I also hear strong support from your family and your friends and your colleagues.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
So,
Great
what do
support
you,
from everyone, including my children, who learned eventually, of course. I actually regret I hid it from them for a little while, and I regret having done that to be truthful, but that's a whole
Why?
other story. Because I worry that they'll not be truthful with me when they have things going on. It's just not a good example of that.
Mhm.
And I think they could have dealt with it better than I gave them credit for. At the time, I worried about their ages
Yeah.
and you
So it
know,
has to do with trust,
has to do with trust. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And I really, given the opportunity to do that again, I would have been truthful immediately. It's not like I actively lied because, it's not like it really came up, but I would have made a point of sitting them down and talking about it. Part of why I didn't do it was because I really didn't know what to expect myself, and like I was saying, my imagination of Parkinson's was a downward trend. It was a matter of when I get there in 5 years or 10 years or what.
mhm.
Here I am, a lot more than that later, going on, I guess, 14 years, and I still feel good. I still feel productive, and, I'm still looking for new challenges. So,
Which is a great segue into my next question, which is, what are you looking toward in your future? Wait,
well,
let me guess. It's not sitting in a hammock and reading a book.
it's probably, I enjoy sitting in a hammock reading a book. I just don't want to do that 8 hours a day.
Why?
Oh, I would enjoy the opportunity to exercise more without that time pressure, but
Yeah.
that'll come someday, hopefully. But well, I've thought about seeking other opportunities as a judge. My training as a lawyer was mostly in federal court. There's some availability up in my part of the world, so you never know. I'm seriously giving thought to applying for that type of position potentially.
For a federal judge.
Yeah,
For the Eastern District?
Northern District.
Northern District of New York.
Yes, yeah.
That would be awesome.
Well, it'd be quite a challenge, but one that I think I'm up for, frankly. So we'll see.
That's great. Anything else that you want to tell folks out there when they are feeling a bit uncertain? That's an understatement
Yeah.
about their, continued ability to work.
Well, here's what I would say is speak to people you trust, and ask them, because for one thing, in a lot of situations, it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. Other people's percent, we tend to be a bit self-critical and you worry about it and it's bad enough having an affliction like Parkinson's, which people talk about like is the end of something, and it's really not necessarily the end of things. And your performance may be better than you think it is. It may not be affecting you as much as you think it is. So talk to people you trust in, and don't make assumptions that you need to go. But if you really do feel like you need to go, then look for that advice. It's worth the investment, even though it will cost you something out front. For the most part, with most lawyers, it's definitely worth it to have a real good idea of how your particular situation translates into a disability application.
Well, Judge Andrews, your philosophy, your approach, and your experience are very inspirational to those of us who are still working and who still want to work, or even, or who just want to make a change in the way that we spend our workaday lives.
Well,
So
thank you.
it's been really great hearing about your bravery, and thank you for sharing it with us.
It's not how I've ever thought of it, but I appreciate it very much. I appreciate the opportunity from you and from the Phinney Foundation to share my experience for whatever it's worth.
Hope to see you on the federal bench sometime soon.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Amy.
You as well. Thank
Okay.
you. Mel, we're good.